I had this question posed to me, which is, do I think Obama is the worst ex-president in American history? And when I say ex-president, we're talking about exclusively activities that a president has after leaving the White House. And the answer I gave was no, because I think it's too early. But he's on his way to becoming that. Now, I didn't really have anywhere near as many, I guess, eyes on me back when Obama was actually in office. So to give the briefest of recaps, I thought he was a mediocre to poor president who failed to go after the banks that caused the subprime mortgage crisis that occurred shortly before he came into power, who took us, in spite of winning a Nobel Peace Prize, from 2 wars to seven, um, and really just did not deliver on the mandate for change in the United States in the way that I thought he would back when he was first elected, and that the thought that many others had at the same time. I felt that he was a lesser consequential figure than Bush, who I would readily admit was worse. Um, and he certainly, out of the last four presidents, is probably not close to, not the one that would be at the bottom, but certainly it's really not a high bar to try to think of him as being at the top. Um, so that I just mentioned that because I don't want to give the appearance of having some pro Obama opinion, and I know that my bias can inform my beliefs. That's why I felt the need to state that and mention it and put it out in the forefront. I have given him credit for things that I think were good, like the Iran nuclear deal, like restoring relations with Cuba, like expanding healthcare coverage with the ACA, even if I preferred single payer. And I'm very inclined to tell you when I think someone does something good. This isn't a despise Democrats just because they have a D by their name channel. It's not a despise Republicans just because they have an R by their name channel. I always try to show some level of balance in terms of, if I like this particular policy they did, I'll give them credit. If I despise this particular policy they did, I won't give them credit because I don't think it's good. Um, when I say worst ex president, again, we're going over activities that have occurred since they left the White House. Now, Obama's been out for 6 years, and under normal circumstances, I would say it's not really fair to, at a minimum, I'd give them 10 years. I think 10 years is a reasonable enough time for retirement for a president to come and decide what they want to do. Um, of course, I mean, let's not forget Carter. By the time the 90s were starting, was already known as someone that traveled around other countries and acted as something of an unofficial diplomat for the United States. So I think 10 years is enough time for a person who's been out of office but held the highest chamber of the land to determine, uh, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my political capital. And in Obama's 6 years, he hasn't really done anything of any noteworthiness that I could deem as pushing the United States forward in a bipartisan way. So, like, for example, Carter, who is widely considered, if not the best ex president, pretty damn close, has pursued diplomatic achievements for the furtherance of the United States under both Democratic and Republican successors of his, and was actually sought out by George H.W. Bush during the latter's presidency for such efforts. Speaking of George H.W. Bush, him and Clinton teamed up for their relief fund I believe it was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And I'm no fan of Clinton, but I'll freely admit that he has multiple instances of participating in charities. Now, when you're talking about someone like George W. Bush, I could say that in his, I believe it's been 13 years of retirement, the most he's done is author some books, do some fundraisers. But you got to understand, Bush was a despised politician when he left office. He was not well liked. People were not clamoring for him to return. So his retirement has really been as low profile as it has been because a very large section of the American public don't like the man. I mean, we're at a point now where Republicans who voted for him in 2004, now 20 years later, talk about how much of a failure he was. Whether you're talking about, Hurricane Katrina, Iraq, subprime mortgage crisis, the list goes on. So he's someone who probably was like the template for having the lazy man's retirement, but I don't feel as harsh towards him because he's someone that people are not still talking about and wishing he would return, and where's our glorious leader when we need him. Obama's one of the most popular, not only politicians in the United States, but well-known politicians in the United States. People are clamoring for a return from him. When he puts out his summer reading list or movie list, people go and they read it, they look it up, they go and see what he likes. He's someone whose opinion very much matters. And I find it, I guess I was excited back when he left office at the prospect of, okay, he doesn't have to run for anything anymore. Now he can start doing things that are less partisan and less donor-based and taking stances that further the United States. Like, he can come out and say, we need to repeal or rather be against the decision in Citizens United. He can talk about dark money. He can talk about the billionaires that own these politicians. Now, he had to play ball with them to even be able to get to where he was. And it would be very effective because as one of the most popular American politicians, his voice is much louder than mine and 99% of normal people, legislators, anyone you can think of that is in this sphere. But instead of doing that, instead of taking some left-wing issue, as a member of the left-wing political party, even though we already know Democrats are nowhere near as left-wing as people try to pretend they are, right? That's why I cringe when you have the modern idiots talking about the communism and socialism of the DNC. It's total nonsense. But instead of taking an issue that a lot of people would support, like single payer, like raise the minimum wage for the first time nationally in over 10 years, he just sits in his bunker and puts out some social media posts here and there and campaigned for his successor to replace him, or rather to take over the White House after him, in the 2020 election. And that's pretty much been it. Sometimes he'll put out a statement about some hot button issue. Like, I know he commented on the Israeli-Hamas conflict a few months back. But I find it sad that at the same time as someone like Carter, who had no problem traveling to other countries, let's not forget Carter was actually the first president, he did it while out of office, but the first president since Calvin Coolidge to travel to Cuba. He did it in between when the U.S. started their embargo and when Obama lifted it. Obama became the first sitting one since Coolidge to go over there. But what I'm saying is, it's sad that at the same time as someone like that really isn't able to be anywhere near as outgoing as he was before due to his advancing age, that the most recent ex-Democratic president won't pick up the baton and say, you know what, I want to go meet with Netanyahu. I want to go meet with this person, that person, and see if we can try to reach some peace deal. And maybe the United States, I can kind of talk to them in a way where I understand this conflict. I was in power before. What needs to be done here, have some kind of negotiation. He doesn't attempt to get involved whatsoever. And it's really pathetic when you think about how, like, I gave him the benefit of the doubt a little bit when I said, okay, Trump's in office. Anything he says or does is like counterintuitive to what Trump wants to do and likely will just stoke more conflict between them. So I get where you want to like just not be involved with the stuff as much at that point. But when you're talking about the U.S. being ran by your former VP and you still can't open your lips or get off your couch on Martha's Vineyard to go and help him and the United States in general with matters of diplomacy that he in his advanced age might not be able to do as effectively as he himself did 10 years ago, I do think there's something wrong with that. I do think he should be criticized for not playing a more active role in the betterment of the United States, whatever that may be. It doesn't even have to be diplomacy. It could just be leading on a particular issue. Like I said, his presidency had loads of notable mass shootings, whether you're talking about Sandy Hook, or let's not forget the Orlando nightclub incident. And you haven't seen, like, Obama had most put out a little tweet on Twitter, but as far as like, you know, we need to get some more Democrats in office so we can do something about all these firearms. No, no such luck. Um, you know, we're talking. This is the president that's known for expanding healthcare. As someone who no longer has to worry about campaign contributions from big pharma, you would think he'd be the first one on board with, hey, let's have a public option. Let's have single payer. Let's get some Democrats that actually want to expand people's coverage so your healthcare isn't tied to your job or you have to worry about premiums and deductibles and copays. But you don't see him doing that. What do you see when you look at former President Obama? What do you see? You see a guy who is mainly concerned with some social media posts. Every now and again, he rears his head to come and show up at some public appearance that really doesn't better any cause, and who's basically just patiently waiting on his library to be made, and you know, living his lavish lifestyle. And I've seen some people who say, "Oh, he deserves it. He had such a hard time in office. Every president struggles in office. Every president has difficult times in their tenure, or rather, throughout their tenure." And considering his youth, like his age being relatively young compared to most presidents, there's really no excuse for him to just retreat as much as he does. Along with his popularity, he should be one of the most active and forefront figures in the American political realm to this day. I mean, even if he wasn't directly speaking out against Trump or directly in favor of Biden, there's really no reason that he, as someone who supposedly cares about the issues, can't be more forthright with those topics and with discussing those things, other than the fact that he simply doesn't care. It was all a big joke back in 2008 to get him elected president, and once he got his 2 terms, he was finished even being concerned about this stuff because, hey, I got my time in office. I had my shot to go down history. You know, first African American president. I'm going to be remembered forever. So why do I have to do anything? And that's what drove me crazy. He actually had the nerve to say he hoped his time out of office would be more consequential than his tenure in the White House. But again, in 6 years, what has he done? He's campaigned for a few people, put out some tweets, put out a few statements about policy, and that's pretty much been it. Yeah, maybe he went to one country here or there, but for the most part, it's been a lazy man's retirement. And I think I'd expect better from a president who's not even 70. I think he should be going to foreign countries and being involved with more issues that affect Americans, because he, as someone who's retired from having to run for office, no longer is beholden on the very same people that tied his hands and didn't allow him to be as progressive as some had hoped in the first place. Although it makes sense when you consider he was never that progressive to begin with and never really cared about any of the topics that he discussed. It's really tragic in a way, because I guess this is just another reminder that in American politics, there's always that one person that comes around like Carter, right, who actually cared about some cause or set of issues where whether they're in power or not, they're going to keep talking about that stuff. And then there are other people like Obama who, you know, they talk a good game trying to get into, you know, some elected position. They get it. They're there for a few years. They don't really change anything, but they're there for a few years. And then they just kind of, you know, recede into the background after they get what they wanted. Because, like I said, if these topics mattered so much to him, he should be more forthcoming and forthright. After Roe v. Wade got overturned, he should have been the first person saying we need to have more Democrats win in the Senate as to stop this from happening again, and the House via codifying Roe v. Wade into law. But you don't see that from him. And that's why I said I think he is not yet the worst ex-president. I actually think a lot of the modern ones, even if you don't like them in office, have been better than, you know, in the past, because they're living longer, so they have larger amounts of time to actually do something. But he's on his way. He is. If I'll put it this way, if we get to, let's say, 2028, and the most you can say about Obama is not that he championed some issue, it's not that he went out and was outspoken about some topic, but that he campaigned for Democrats every 4 years or every 2 years, and just, you know, spoke in favor of his political party. That's really all you need to know to confirm that he's just a waste of space in terms of being one of the most famous politicians in the United States. And it's sad that this is what people want back. People miss him. They still idealize him within the Democratic Party. He was their young, strapping leader in charge who was going to reform the system and right the wrongs of George W. Bush. But the reality is, this is a guy who, just talked a good game. Most things really did not change when he was in office, and now he's making sure that in his retirement, most things don't change. Which is even more depressing because, as someone who doesn't have to run for office, he should be as forthright and outgoing about these things as he's ever been. And I had, just on one last note, I had a person who said, "Oh, maybe he doesn't speak that much because he's worried that if they investigate Biden, something will come back to him." Biden didn't become president for over 2 years into Obama's retirement, and during that time, he was barely talking anyway. So it just comes down to someone who was able to trick a lot of people into thinking they cared about stuff, now showing their true colors by barely being involved because they never cared in the first place about anything other than getting their behind in the White House and getting their 8 years so they could get the hell out and become a sellout by achieving levels of wealth that would have never been seen on their part until they won that election in 2008 and later 2012.